from James chapter 3, starting at verse 13 and going through to chapter 4, verse 8. Who is wise and understanding among you, that he show it by his good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom? But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace, loving, considerate, submission, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who row in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Do they come from your desires that battle within you? You want something but you don't get it. You kill and covet, but you cannot have what you want. You quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive, but because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. You adulterous people, don't you know that the friendship with the world is hatred towards God? Anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. Or do you think Scripture says without reason that the Spirit He caused to live in us envies intensely? But He gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts. You double-minded. Our second scripture reading is in Mark. It's chapter 9, verse 30 to 37. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were, because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him. They came to Capernaum, where he was in the house, and he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "If anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and a servant of all." He took a little child and had him stand among them. Taking him in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." May God help us understand these readings.
For our story time, I would invite the young members of our church family to join me in front. We've been thinking about storytelling, and I have my little skunk, who was formerly known as Violet, but we're going to change the name because that might be misinterpreted by at least one person. And I told you a story about what happened to me one day on the way to church. I saw a skunk, and the skunk had its snout stuck in the bottom of a can that used to be full of chocolate powder. Got his nose in there and couldn't get out. And I thought, now what do I do? Should I help the skunk? I didn't help the skunk because I was on the way to church and I didn't want to go into church smelling like a skunk. And I went home, I couldn't find the skunk, so I still don't know what happened. But I told you that there's a story like that in the Bible. So I'm going to read you some of that story from the Bible and see if you can figure out how the skunk story fits.
I'm gonna name the skunk.
Yeah.
Billy Bob Joe.
Billy Bob Joe the skunk. Okay, let me ask you a question. Is Billy Bob Joe a boy's name or a girl's name or both?
Both.
Both? That's good, because the skunk's a girl. So Billy Bob Joe the skunk.
Billy Bob Joe.
Let me see if I can remember that. I'll talk to the skunk and see.
Billy Bob Joe.
So here's the story. Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers, and they beat him up, and they went away, leaving him half dead. Does this sound like the story of the skunk? As it happened, a priest, like a minister, was going along the road, and he saw the man who was beat up and lying there, and he walked by on the other side of the road. Now, that's strange for a minister to do. Maybe he was afraid of a skunk, or that the robbers were still there and they'd jump on him. Well, we're told by Jesus, and then a Levite, who we can sort of equate to one of our elders or leaders in the church, he came by, and when he saw the man who had been beat up, he too went by on the other side. But a Samaritan, which we might equate to someone who doesn't come to church and doesn't know Jesus, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him, he went to him, he bandaged his wounds, he put him on his own donkey, and he took him to an inn and took care of him. Yeah.
I know this story is, but I also know another story. I thought it was this.
What story is that?
It was in the disciples.
Okay, hang on to that. We'll probably get to that. But here's a story about people like this skunk. They didn't want to help because they were afraid of what might happen to them. But one person was brave enough to take the chance to help. And it made a difference. So the story encourages us to think about taking the chance to help one another. So back to the skunk story. If I'd helped the skunk, would I have felt better to get that off his nose and let him go free? I would have felt great. And if I'd come to church smelling of the skunk, what would have happened? Nobody would have sat near me, but they all would have asked, how come you smell like a skunk? And I could tell them the story about helping. So maybe part of Jesus' story is to encourage us to help and to tell stories that will help others. The stories of Jesus. So that's our story for today. We continue in Mark's Gospel. Jesus is walking the road with his friends, and they're talking. And in today's reading from Mark's Gospel, the context needs to be considered. Jesus has, just a little while before this, asked his disciples, "Who do you say I am?" Asking them, "Who am I to you?" And then he went on to predict that he would be put to death. And his disciples didn't like that one little bit. And Peter, as he spoke up and said so, got into trouble for saying so. In today's reading, we have a second prediction made by Jesus about what was going to happen to him when they got to Jerusalem. And again, the disciples didn't understand because primarily, I think, they didn't want to understand. What Jesus was saying didn't fit their plans. They were focused on their own things. So as they're walking along, they come to the point where Jesus says, "What were you arguing about on the road?" They got to the house, they're catching their breath. Jesus says, "What were you arguing about?" Some versions of the Bible say, what were you debating on the road? Or what were you discussing on the road? But I really like this take on it. What were you arguing? In my head, an argument is different than a debate or a discussion. So, I'm going to need your help here. What is an argument? Any ideas? I know you don't argue at all, but just, you've probably seen others argue. What is an argument? A difference of opinions, absolutely.
A verbal fight.
A verbal fight. If you look it up in the dictionary, it says an exchange of diverging or opposite views. The one definition of an argument I like the best is it is a difference of opinions where you are wrong and I am right. Or how about this definition? It's a dispute or a hard discussion, not a nice situation where two or more people disagree about a specific point of view. And that's important to understand because Jesus says, what were you arguing about as we traveled on the road? And did you hear what Mark in his gospel records as their response to that question? They kept silent. They didn't want Jesus to know what they were arguing about. Although they should have figured out if he's asking, he already knew. And Jesus already knows these kind of things. But like us, they try to keep secrets, holding their hearts back from God because they're afraid it might get them into trouble. And what Jesus does is to challenge their assumptions, their beliefs, their thoughts, their ideas, their opinions. He challenges the problem that we all have of imposing our God values on other people. Our beliefs, our thoughts, our opinions, our ideas, imposed on others as though they came from God himself. Jesus is asking about our God values and if they are really God's God values. Be careful. The answer is not always easy. And Jesus did so what can only be described as a paradox. He used a paradox to teach them. Now, you all know what a paradox is. There are a couple of interesting definitions, but I'll give you one. A paradox is a statement or proposition that, despite sound or apparently sound reasoning from acceptable premises, leads to a conclusion that doesn't make sense. A paradox is something that seems to take you where you want to go, but you don't really quite get there. So here's an example of a paradox. Have a really good look at this. Escher, as an artist and a theoretician, did a series of drawings that are all much more than meets the eye. And in this particular one, the paradox is found in which hand is drawing which hand. Who's in charge here? What's going on here? And here's the Jesus paradox. If anyone wants to be first, they must be last. The disciples were talking about the greatest in the kingdom. To be great in God's kingdom, you must become a servant. Jesus talks about how we best receive Christ in our lives. And he uses an interesting model to make sense out of something that he understood that makes sense when you get it, but on the surface seems strange. You want to be first, you have to be last. You want to be great, you must serve. Well, the Jesus way, he says, whoever welcomes or receives one of these little children in my name welcomes or receives me. And whoever welcomes, receives me, welcomes, receives the one who sent me. So in that context of the discussion of how to be great, Jesus teaches his disciples how to receive God in fullness by receiving a child in my name. And as we receive people as from Christ and see Christ in them, that breaks down all sorts of walls and barriers and preconceptions. And if this scripture holds true, then we receive Christ in fullness as we learn to receive others in Christ's name. So if we have a hard time receiving others, the logic says we'll have a hard time receiving Christ in fullness. It's a strange concept, but that is the Jesus way to throw our thinking on edge so that we will hear the power of the gospel and we will have to respond one way or the other. So what's going on here? And what are the implications of the paradox of if you want to be first, you must be last. If you want to be great, you must be a servant. And if you want to receive Christ, you must receive his children. Well, I think this is why Mark's gospel passage today was linked to the passage in James that talks about wisdom. And wisdom is a word I really like, because I don't want to be smart, but I would like to be wise. And in the word wisdom, we think we know what it means, but did you ever notice, until I pointed out now, that dumb is a part of wisdom? That may not mean anything to any of you. To me, I think that's wonderful. So if I were to ask you, what is wisdom? What would you say? Sometimes it's interesting to unpack these words that we use all the time and we know what they mean, but well, the dictionary says this. What is wisdom? It's the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. And then the dictionary says it's the quality of being wise. One of these definitions that doesn't help much. Experience, knowledge, and good judgment. We can begin to understand that. And James takes it a step further and talks from wisdom from above versus earthly wisdom. Now, I don't know about you, but my head spins when I look at earthly wisdom, particularly politics. Have you ever tried to open or switch a bank account recently? The process is crazy. We live in a world of rules and regulations and ways of doing things that frustrate me no end and just don't make any sense to me anymore. But when we're talking about wisdom from above, James says that such wisdom and understanding are shown by living a good life. And perhaps we could rephrase that, living a God life. Deeds done in humility and faith make things that don't make any sense have an impact on people and change lives. Just think about what Jesus did that didn't make any sense, but we still remember him today. And just so that we get it clear, James gives us a list. Wisdom from above involves being pure. And to be pure, by a dictionary definition, means free from any contamination. In a more spiritual sense, it means being wholesome or single-minded on the things of God. So we're not distracted, or our ways don't become imposed on God. So wisdom from above begins as we are pure. It is used in our peace-loving nature. One version of the scriptures uses the word peaceable, which I think is maybe a better word, that we are to be peaceable people, which means that the onus is on us, not that we love peace, although I hope we do, but we're peaceable. We have to make sure that we bring peace to other people, that we don't get in the way, that we don't upset them, that we are an influence of God's spirit of calm. Wisdom from above involves being pure and peace-loving or peaceable. It involves being considerate, showing careful thought for others. Break that word down. We are full of care for others as one of the priorities in our living. And just think of the wisdom that comes from living in such a way. We are, according to James, to be submissive. Submissive is a negative word that brings up all negative types of conversations. And in church, it always echoes back to that passage in the Bible which says that wives are to submit to their husbands. And if it's in the Bible, it must be so. But what does it mean? It really means to be humble. Not to be passive or meek, but to be humble. To be willing to give up something of yourself for the betterment of someone else. Submissiveness in this way is an act of the will, particularly in relationship to who God is and to who we are in relation to who God is. I don't have a problem with submissiveness. We are to be full of mercy. Now, in the church, we think we know what that means. But mercy also comes from a root that is focused not on us, but on others, beyond ourselves. So this wisdom from above brings us a list of things that we have a stake in being for other people, full of mercy. And then I like this one, and good fruit. We're supposed to be full of good fruit. A great, healthy dietary tip from the scriptures. Peach season is a strange season because you go to the store and the peaches look wonderful and you bring them home and often you take the bite of the best looking peach and either it's not ready or it was ready yesterday. What James is getting at is the wisdom from above comes from us to others in a way that encourages and that makes a difference. And it's a peach when it happens. And then we are to be impartial. And this is a tough one because again we have our ideas of how things should be, but we're called from the wisdom above to be fair and to be just and to side with the weak and the oppressed, to those who really need our help and our love. And above all else, all this needs to be sincere. Because as James knew, as the disciples came to know, you can't put this on. Because if you try to do all those things so you check them off the checklist, your motivation is not wisdom from above. Your motivation is to check those off so you can say, I did the whole list. Look at me. Wisdom from above needs to be pure, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. That's the wisdom that comes from God that is in stark contrast to the wisdom of the world. And at that point, if you're like me, you're ready to hit the button to shut all this off because it's just too much. But we read in James these words, God gives more grace. And when we receive that grace, what does God do next? You can say it. And after that, what does God do? God gives more grace. So while it impacts us, this is something that God does. And so we can walk with Him. And if you want to walk with Him, this is what you do. It's very simple. Submit to God. Resist the devil. Draw near to God. Wash your hands. Purify your hearts. This is an ongoing process that enables us to be great in the eyes of God. If we're able to do that, then we recognize who God is and what He's doing in our lives. And we will find that in His mercy and grace, we are what He needs us to be, the servant of all. And as that plays out, that is good news for us and for the world. Thanks be to God. Amen.